The evening Seoul had chosen to behave like a movie set. That was the first thought that crossed Adesuwa Igbinoba's mind as she stepped off the elevator on the 42nd floor of the Hanwoo Tower and took in the gleaming expanse of the private banquet hall. The kind of room that made ordinary humans feel like they'd accidentally wandered into someone else's destiny. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Han River below, silver and slow-moving, cut through the lights of bridges strung like necklaces across the throat of the city. The air smelled of cedarwood, barley tea, and the faint electrical hum of money in motion. Adesuwa had worked for these events in the past 6 weeks. She knew the smell by now. She knew the sound of it too. The careful murmur of negotiations dressed up as conversation. Champagne flutes lifted with the precise arc of people who had practiced looking casual. She was not supposed to notice any of this. She was supposed to carry trays, refill glasses, and remain invisible. She was very good at being invisible. 29 years of practice. The first 14 had been in Lagos, where invisibility was survival skill, where a girl who watched too carefully and said too little learned to read the geometry of moments before the adults in the room had finished arranging them. The next 15 had been split between London and Seoul, following her mother's nursing career first, then her own ambitions into translation work, then, after the accident that rearranged everything, into whatever paid. Tonight, that was this, a black and white uniform, a silver tray, and the practice art of noticing without being noticed. She had cleared 3 tables and was navigating toward the bar for a refill when she saw him, not for the first time. She had noticed him the moment she walked in. It would have been difficult not to. There was a quality to Ryu Jae-won that defied the usual mechanisms of not looking. He was not the tallest man in the room, not the loudest, not the most conventionally striking. He was, in fact, almost aggressively still. He stood near the far windows with a glass of water he hadn't touched, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him the way suits only fit men who have stopped caring whether suits fit them, and he was listening to the man beside him with a particular quality of attention that made the listening man feel, Adesuwa imagined, like the most important person alive. She had looked him up. Of course she had. It was a habit. When she took a catering shift at an event like this, she always researched the principles. Know the room. Know who matters. Know who the danger might orbit. Ryu Jae-won, 41. Chairman of Hanwoo Group, one of Korea's mid-tier conglomerates in logistics and materials. Not the glittering chaebols that made international headlines, but solid, old, and apparently indestructible despite 3 years of calculated assault from a competitor named Shim Byung-soo, whose company, Daepung Holdings, had been quietly buying up Hanwoo suppliers, poaching at engineers, and, according to financial news, Adesuwa had skimmed on her phone before the shift, staging a hostile takeover attempt that had consumed the Seoul business press. For the better part of a year, widower, 1 son, 7 years old, named Seo-jun. The boy's mother, Park Ji-hyun, had died in a car accident 3 years ago, for months before Shim Byung-soo began his siege. Some called it a coincidence. Some did not. The man beside Jae-won now was not Shim Byung-soo. Adesuwa knew what Shim looked like. She'd seen his photograph beside the articles. This man was younger, late 30s, with a slightly too wide smile of someone performing friendliness for an audience. His name tag read Kim Doyoung, Daepung Holdings. A representative. A messenger. She didn't give it more thought as she passed. She collected 2 empty glasses, set them on her tray, turned, and stopped. It wasn't anything obvious. In fact, it was so subtle that she would spend the next 3 hours questioning whether she had imagined it. Kim Doyoung had shifted his weight slightly, and in doing so had angled his body by perhaps 15 degrees. It was a micro-movement, unconscious looking. But it meant his right side now faced away from the room, and the right side of his suit jacket, just below the lowest button, had developed a subtle heaviness, a weight that pulled the fabric differently than it had 4 minutes ago when she'd first walked past him. Something was now in that jacket that hadn't been there before. Adesuwa had grown up around men who carried things they shouldn't. She had learned young to read the geometry of a jacket, the can of a hip, the way a person's torso reorganized itself around something new and heavy. It was not a skill she had asked for. It was a skill Lagos had given her free of charge. Her tray was steady. Her face was steady. She was already past them, heading toward the service corridor when the thought completed itself. He put something under the table. She stopped again, looked back carefully, as if she'd remembered something. Jae-won was still listening to Kim Do-yeon with that precise, unhurried attention. The table between them was low, a cocktail table, waist-high. Beneath it, half hidden by the tablecloth, was a small black device the size of a matchbox, adhered to the underside. She could see the edge of it from here. Most people would not. Most people's eyes did not inventory the undersides of tables at a glance. She had 3 seconds to decide. She walked back. She did not rush. She moved with the unhurried purposefulness of someone doing her job, cleared the untouched water glass from Jae-won's side of the table, set a fresh one in its place, and as she did, she leaned just slightly forward, close enough to be professional, but not so close as to be noticed, and said, in a voice pitched below the ambient conversation, "There is something under your table. Don't look down." A pause added weight to it. Then, in the same quiet register, "Thank you." He did not look down. He did not look at Kim Do-yeon. He looked at her, briefly, with the full weight of his attention, and she felt it land on her like a physical thing. Not threatening, not romantic, but exact, as if he had filed every detail of her face in a single second and would not lose any of it. She picked up her tray and walked away. 30 seconds later, Kim Do-yeon's phone rang. He excused himself with that same too-wide smile and walked toward the corridor. Jae-won watched him go. Then he turned, found the nearest member of his security team, and bent his head toward the man's ear for exactly 4 seconds. The device was removed. Security swept the table. Someone was quietly asked to leave. None of this was visible to the room. Adesuwa heard about it afterward, in fragments, through the kitchen wall, the way she heard most things. Listening device, Daepang, and then, louder, her supervisor calling her name. She thought, that's over. I did the thing. I go home. She was wrong. Drop a comment right now. Would you have said something? Most people walk past. Most people don't want the trouble. Adesuwa is not most people. Subscribe before we go further. This story earns it. She was in the service elevator, coat on, bag over her shoulder, when the doors opened on 42 again and a man stepped in beside her. Not Jae-won. One of his people, 30s careful posture, suit that wasn't quite as good as his employer's. He held a small envelope. "Mr. Ryu would like to speak with you," he said. "If you are willing." She looked at the envelope, did not take it. "About what?" "He will explain." She thought about the matchbox-sized device under the table, about Daepang Holdings and what 3 years of siege warfare looked like from inside the walls, about the fact that she had intervened in something she did not fully understand and would now be required to own that intervention. 5 minutes, she said. He was alone in a smaller room off the main hall. Not the grand banquet space, but something like an anteroom. More like an office borrowed for night, with a desk and 2 chairs and a view of the river that seemed almost apologetically beautiful given the circumstances. He was standing when she came in, which surprised her. She had expected the power pose. Seated, waiting, making her approach him. He was standing by the window, jacket still on, hands in his pockets. "I owe you an explanation," he said, in English, after she'd entered. His accent was precise, a little formal, and an apology, and, I think, a conversation. "You don't owe me anything," Adesuwa said. "I noticed something. I said something. That's where my involvement ends." "It isn't," he said. "I'm sorry. I know that isn't what you want to hear. Kim Do-yeon saw you. Not what you found. He doesn't know that. But he saw you speak to me. He'll report it to his employer. That means Shim Byung-soo will have questions about a catering staff member who had a private conversation with me tonight. A beat. I need to make sure you're safe." She looked at him steadily. "I have a job, an apartment, a routine. I'm not in anyone's story." "You weren't," he said. "Tonight, change that. Not because of anything you did wrong. Because of what you noticed." He paused. "What you noticed, by the way, the listening device, had been placed in the previous 90 seconds. Our security sweep hadn't caught it. You did." Another pause, this one with a different texture. "How?" Adesuwa looked at the river. His jacket hung differently. A silence. Then quietly, "Where you from?" "Lagos, originally." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of rearranging. "My son's primary school teacher is Nigerian," he said, which was an odd non sequitur, delivered with thoughtfulness that suggested it was not actually a non sequitur. "He talks about her every day." "Good for her," Adesuwa said. The ghost of something, not quite a smile, crossed his face. "Will you let my team arrange temporary accommodation? Just until we understand the scope of Shim's interest. 3 days, maybe a week." She should have said no. Every sensible part of her knew the answer was no. She had a life that was small and manageable and built carefully from the ruin of earlier things. And that life did not include becoming a variable in a corporate war between men who moved differently in rooms than she did. "1 week," she said. "Then I go back to my life." He nodded once. "Thank you." She noticed he said thank you the way people say it when they mean something more complicated. Not gratitude exactly, but recognition. As if he understood that what she was agreeing to cost her something, and was choosing to acknowledge that, without making it bigger than it was. She filed the detail away. She filed most things about him away. The accommodation was a service apartment in Yongsan-gu, 17 floors above a street lined with small restaurants and an old record shop whose windows she had pressed her face against, briefly, on the morning of her second day, watching the owner sort through a crate of vinyl with the focused pleasure of a man who had decided this was the most important thing happening in the world. The apartment smelled faintly of cedar, the same note as the banquet hall, she realized, which meant it was probably the building's climate system, and had a kitchen she didn't need, and a view of the city's layered silhouette. She found herself standing at it in the early morning before she could explain why. On the first day, no one came. Her meals were delivered. Her catering agency was told she had a family emergency and would be unavailable for the week. She read, "Watch the city. Try not to feel like a person waiting for something to happen." On the second day, the boy arrived. She heard him before she saw him. A high, clear voice in the hallway, mid-argument about something, and then a knock on her door, and when she opened it, there was a 7-year-old in a school uniform with slightly too large ears and the focused expression of someone doing reconnaissance. "Are you the lady from the party?" he asked in Korean. Adesuwa looked past him. A security detail stood at a respectful distance. Behind the boy, in the hallway, his father was in conversation on a phone, jacket on, cup of coffee in his left hand, and the way he was turned, almost deliberately away, suggested he was giving his son room to do whatever it was his son had decided to do. "I am," she said in Korean. Her Korean was good. 5 years of good. The boy considered her for a moment with the unsettling seriousness of children who have learned to evaluate adults for safety. Then, "Appa says you helped us." "A little. He says you noticed something a security team missed." "I got lucky." He says people who say that are usually lying, the boy said, with the exact tone of someone quoting their father precisely. "In a good way." She laughed. It surprised her, a genuine, sudden sound that she hadn't planned. The boy blinked at it, then smiled slowly, as if he'd been waiting for that specific piece of data. "I'm Seo-jun," he said. "I'm Adesuwa," she said. "That's a hard name," he said not unkindly. "Most good things are," she said. From down the hall, she heard the soft end of a phone call, then footsteps. Then Jae-won appeared behind his son with the expression of a man who had expected something different and was recalibrating. Not displeasure. Something more like wonder, held very carefully in check. "I apologize," he said. He asked to come. "I should have—" "It's fine," Adesuwa said. She looked at the boy. "Would you like to come in? I have barley tea." Seo-jun looked at his father. His father looked at her. A pause that had weight to it. Then, for a few minutes, Jae-won said. He stood just inside the doorway while his son sat at the kitchen table and drank tea with the focused seriousness of a child treating an ordinary thing like a ceremony. Jae-won held his coffee cup. He did not sit. He stood with the particular quality of a man who had forgotten how to occupy a space that wasn't a boardroom or briefing room, who had gotten so used to rooms reorganizing themselves around him that the simple act of standing in a kitchen, not being important, had become strange. "He's good," Adesuwa said quietly, not turning from the window she'd gone to stand at. Yes, Jae-won said. A beat. His teacher says he has very precise social instincts. For a 7-year-old. She's right. Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, do you have family? In Lagos? She considered the question. My mother is here. In Seoul. She's a nurse at Severance. A breath. My father died 6 years ago. In Nigeria. I'm sorry. He had a full life, she said. He was a good man. A pause of her own. He worked in logistics, actually. Import-export, Port of Lagos. He used to say he'd spent 30 years moving the world from one place to another and couldn't explain how any of it worked. She heard, in the pause that followed, something change. It was a subtle thing, the quality of the silence, like a frequency shift. Adesuwa, he said carefully. What was your father's name? Igbinoba Chukwuemeka, she said. Why? A longer pause. When she turned, his expression was the most unguarded thing she had seen on his face since they'd met. Not distressed, not alarmed, something that looked almost like recognition. The rearranging of a fact that had been filed in the wrong place for a long time. That name, he said slowly, was in my father's journal. The journal had been in a wooden box in Jae-won's office at the Hanwoo Tower for 9 years, since his father's death. He had read it once, in the immediate aftermath of grief, and then placed it exactly where he could see it from his desk and not feel required to open it again. The dead deserved their privacy. He decided, even from their children. He brought it to the apartment that evening. Seo-jun had fallen asleep on the couch in the living room by the time Jae-won laid the journal on the kitchen table. A worn black notebook. The kind sold at stationers in the 1990s, its cover gone soft with handling. Adesuwa looked at it for a moment. Looked at him. I don't know exactly what's in it, he said. About your father. I only read it once. But there's a section about Lagos, about 1993, when my father worked the Asian African trade expansion at Hanwoo. The company had a partnership with a logistics contact at the port of Lagos. He opened the journal, slowly, to a page he had apparently found earlier, set it between them. He wrote the name 3 times. He underlined it once. Adesuwa looked at the page. The Korean characters she could read imperfectly. Her Korean was conversational, not literary, and the handwriting was dense. But the name in the middle of the page, rendered phonetically in Korean script, was unmistakably her father's. She sat down. What happened in 1993? She asked. Jae-won sat across from her. My father was in Lagos for 6 weeks, finalizing a shipping agreement that would have been the first major Korea-Nigeria trade corridor for the company. It was important to him, not just commercially. He believed in it, I think, in a way that was personal. A pause. There was an incident at the port. He was caught in something. A dispute between dock workers and a foreman who had connections to people my father did not want to be connected to. I don't know the details. He never told me directly. His eyes went to the journal. He wrote that a man intervened, physically stepped between my father and 3 men who, the journal says, had intentions that were not ambiguous. He wrote that this man's name was Igbinoba Chukwuemeka, that he spoke in Igbo and then in English, that he was calm. Jae-won's voice was quiet and careful. He wrote that he owed this man his life. Adesuwa was very still. He tried to find him afterward. Jae-won continued. The deal fell through. Political complications, currency crisis, things that had nothing to do with either of them. My father went back to Seoul. He spent years trying to reconnect through the shipping industry channels, but the contact points had all changed. He lost the thread. A pause. He died not having closed that account. He died, Adesuwa said slowly, not having said thank you to a man who saved his life. Yes. She thought about her father, about the way he talked about Korea. Obliquely, occasionally, the way people mention a place that meant something they can't quite name. He had never told her this story. Perhaps he had not thought it was a story. Perhaps it was just a day to him. A Tuesday in 1993, when he'd seen 3 men being stupid and stepped between them. Because that was what you did. He never mentioned it, she said. My father, he never. She stopped. He was like that. He didn't keep accounts. Something in Jae-won's expression tightened slightly, then released. Neither did mine, I think, but he wrote it down. 30 years later, it's still the only entry he underlined. A silence opened between them. That was not uncomfortable, not yet intimate, either. It was something more precise than both. The silence of two people who had just discovered that their histories share a seam neither of them knew was there. Seo-jun murmured something in his sleep. Both of them looked at the boy, then back at each other, then away, the sequence happening quickly, almost simultaneously, and then both of them not commenting on it. Adesuwa began. Yes, Jae-won said. He picked up the journal. Did not close it. I'll leave you the relevant pages. A copy, if you want them. He looked at her. I think your father would have liked knowing. Yes, she said. I think he would have. He collected Seo-jun from the couch with the practiced ease of someone who had carried a sleeping child many times. The boy barely stirring, folding himself against his father's chest with the boneless trust of the fully unconscious. Jae-won paused at the door. Adesuwa! The way he said her name was careful, as if he had rehearsed the pronunciation and was checking whether he'd gotten it right. Yes, thank you for the tea. She didn't say anything. He left. She stood in the kitchen for a long time after the door closed, listening to the city's low murmur and thinking about 1993 and the geometry things that travel 30 years before they land. The week passed. She did not go back to her apartment. It was not a decision she made dramatically. It accumulated. On the third day, Jae-won's chief of security, a man named Officer Nam who communicated primarily through eyebrows, delivered a brief level update. Shim Byung-soo had run a background check on all catering staff at the Hangul event. Her name had been flagged. Flagged, in this context, meant that someone had pulled her address, her phone record summary, and the file from her 3-month translation contract with a maritime law firm 6 years ago that had, incidentally, handled 3 of Hangul Group's international shipping disputes. They're looking for a connection, Nam said. There isn't one, Adesuwa said. There is now, he said, not unkindly. On the 4th day, she called her mother. Her mother, Adesuwa Igbinoba, was a woman who had survived 29 years of raising Adesuwa, 2 international relocations, a husband's death, and a Seoul winter without central heating, and who therefore brought to every situation the energy of someone who had already assessed the worst and decided it was manageable. She listened to the summary Adesuwa gave her, edited, compressed, calibrated for a mother, and then said, "Is he handsome? Mama, that is useful information." Her mother said serenely, "I'm asking for context. He is a widower with a child and a corporation under siege. I am a catering staff member who noticed the wrong thing at the wrong time. There is no context." Said her mother, in the tone that meant she had formed an opinion and was choosing to keep it. On the 5th day, a first aid kit appeared on the kitchen counter. She had not asked for one. She found it there at 3 a.m. when she got up for water, a proper kit, not a hotel amenity, the kind with proper bandages and antiseptic, and on the counter beside it, a sealed container jollof rice from a Nigerian restaurant 6 blocks away that she had mentioned in passing on the 2nd day when Seo-jun asked her what food she missed. She stood in the kitchen for a moment holding the container. The building was quiet. The city below was quiet in the way Seoul is quiet at 3 a.m., not silent, but respectful of the hour. She ate standing at the counter, and the rice tasted exactly right, and she thought, someone paid attention. She filed the detail away. Is anyone still here? Drop a comment below. Has anyone ever noticed something they weren't supposed to notice, and it changed everything? Because that's exactly where we are. Keep watching. On the 6th day, she met him in the lobby of the building by accident. She was returning from a walk. He was leaving for what appeared to be a morning run, which she hadn't expected from a man who moved through the world in tailored suits. He was in athletic clothes and looked unexpectedly like a person, not a chairman, not a fixed point around which rooms reorganized, just a man with slightly disheveled hair and a water bottle, who stopped when he saw her and said, "Good morning," as if they passed each other in lobbies regularly. "You run," she said, "every day." A pause. "My wife used to say I ran away from my thoughts. I told her I ran fast enough they couldn't keep up." He said it without the heavy freight of grief. Just a fact, offer without performance. Then, she was probably right. Adesuwa looked at him for a moment. He had the look of a man who'd been alone with his grief long enough that he'd gotten used to the weight of it, who carried it not dramatically but practically, the way you carry a heavy bag when there's nowhere to put it down. She sounds like she was smart, Adesuwa said. Yes, he said, simply, without embellishment. They stood in the lobby for a moment, 3 centimeters of morning light between them. Then his phone buzzed, and the moment ended, and he excused himself, and she took the elevator up and stood in her borrowed kitchen and thought, I am not supposed to be finding this man interesting. But she was finding this man interesting. What she did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that Ryu Jae-won's situation was considerably more complicated than a hostile takeover. She learned this on the 7th day, when Nam delivered another briefing, and this one had photographs. Shim Bungsu, Nam said, laying the first photograph on the table, has been acquiring Hanwha suppliers and shipping partners for 3 years. This is known. What is less known, he laid a second photograph, is that the funding source of these acquisitions is not Daepong Holdings' operating capital. It is coming through 3 intermediary companies registered in Singapore and Hong Kong, which trace back to a private equity structure that has also funded 2 other corporate demolitions in the past 5 years. One in Japan, one in Taiwan. A pause. Both of those companies had fathers who died in the 12 months before the siege began. Adesuwa looked at the photographs. Then at Nam. Are you saying... I am not saying anything, Nam said carefully. I am showing you what we have found. Where is Jae-won? He is aware of this information. That's not what I asked. Nam looked at her with an expression that suggested he had been carefully briefed not to answer follow-up questions. He is managing the situation, Nam said. What situation, specifically? Another pause. Nam seemed to calculate something. Then, there will be a shareholders' meeting in 9 days. At this meeting, Shim Byung-soo will move to install a new board majority by leveraging shares he has acquired through nominees. If the motion passes, Hanwha Group will effectively be under Daepong control within 90 days. He gathered the photographs. Mr. Ryu has a counter-strategy. It requires the cooperation of 3 current board members and 1 major institutional shareholder who has, until now, remained neutral. And last night, that shareholder received a call, Nam said, suggesting that cooperation with Mr. Ryu carried certain risks. A beat. We believe the call came from someone with access to information that should not have been accessible. The listening device, Adesuwa said, possibly one of several. She sat with this for a moment. Then what does he need? Nam blinked, which for him was equivalent to an expression of surprise. I'm sorry. Jae-won, what does he need that he doesn't currently have? That is, Nam stopped, restarted. Why do you ask? Because I've been sitting in this apartment for 6 days because I noticed the geometry of a jacket, Adesuwa said. And if my presence here is connected to a situation larger than one listening device, I would like to understand the situation. And because... She paused, choosing words. My father spent 30 years in logistics, and I spent 3 months in maritime law translation, and I may understand shipping and corporate structure in ways that are occasionally useful. Nam looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I will speak to Mr. Ryu. He came that evening, without security, for the first time, just himself, in a suit that was slightly more rumpled than usual, tie loosened by precisely 1 degree, which in the vocabulary of a man who was always entirely composed amounted to something close to disarray. He sat down at the table. She put barley tea in front of him. He wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at it for a moment. Nam tells me you want to understand the situation, he said. I already understand most of it, she said. I want to understand the part you haven't told your security team. He looked up, a pause that had weight to it. There's a counter move, she said. You have one. I can tell because of the way you're sitting. A man who had no options would sit differently. Something crossed his face. Not surprise, but a recalibration, as if he had prepared for several possible openings, and this was not one of them. You read posture. I read everything. A silence. Then quietly he told her. The counter move was this. 3 years ago, before Shim Byung-soo had started his siege, Jae-won had begun quietly restructuring Hanwoo's international partnerships, moving the company's most critical supplier relationships through a network of subsidiary agreements that, if fully executed, would make a hostile takeover strategically useless. The logic was elegant. Control the board, control the company's Korean assets. Yes, but Hanwoo's real value was in its international logistics network, and that network would contractually dissolve back to its constituent partners within 90 days of a change of control, unless specific conditions were met. Those conditions required the cooperation of one man, a Singapore-based shipping broker named Marcus Teo, who held the anchor contract in the restructured network and who had, until very recently, been a firm ally. Until very recently. Because Marcus Teo had, 3 days ago, gone silent. He stopped returning my calls. Jae-won said, his assistant says he is traveling. I don't believe he is traveling. What do you believe? I believe Shim reached him. And I believe, he paused, that whatever Shim offered him or threatened him with was specific enough to his personal situation that my counteroffer of contractual goodwill is not sufficient. What's his personal situation? His daughter is in a medical facility in Singapore. Rare neurological condition. The facility costs are, he paused, significant, and the facility has a new majority shareholder as of last month. He looked at her. Daepeng Holdings. Adesuwa sat with this for a moment. He's been threatened through his daughter's care. Not directly. Not in any way that can be proven. And you have 9 days. 8 now. She thought about what she knew. Maritime law, shipping contracts, Singapore's corporate registry, the particular architecture of subsidiary agreements and the specific clauses that govern them. She thought about her father in Lagos in 1993, doing the math on 3 men, and deciding to step between them. If Marcus Teo's contract can be independently verified as unassignable under change of control, she said slowly, does that change Shim's leverage? Jae-won looked at her. How do you mean? The medical facility, if its majority shareholder changed, or if the specific controlling stake were challenged on regulatory grounds. The threat dissolves. Daepeng Holdings doesn't have a clean majority in that facility if the acquisition violated Singapore's healthcare foreign investment regulations. She paused. Which it might, because Singapore limits foreign PE control of licensed healthcare facilities to 49%. And Daepeng Holdings stake, structured through its Hong Kong intermediary, might technically push it over. A very long silence. You worked in maritime law, he said, for 3 months, but I read everything. A pause. Including the ACRA filings for that facility last year, because I noticed in the background a photograph in a shipping brief from a contact in Singapore and thought the ownership structure looked unusual. You noticed that? He said. Jacket hems and corporate registries, she said. I have a type. He looked at her for a moment, the full weight of his attention, again, landing on her like a physical thing. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was genuine, unguarded, the kind of laugh that lives below the composure man has spent years building up, a real one, a surprised one, the sound of someone who hasn't laughed like that in a while, and had forgotten it felt like this. Adesuwa felt something shift. She did not name it. Send me what you have, he said, when the laugh had settled. The ACRA analysis. Whatever you saw. I'll need access to a few databases. You'll have it by morning. She nodded. He stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. The same pause as before with a different quality. Your father, he said. Did he ever talk about Korea? Occasionally, she said. He said it was a country that understood the value of patience. Jae-won was quiet for a moment. My father said something similar about Nigeria. A beat. He said the people he met there understood that the long way around is sometimes the only way through. She thought about 1993, about a journal underlined once. They would have gotten along, she said. Yes, he said. I think they would have. The next 5 days were the most intensely focused of Adesuwa's life since her translation bar exams. She worked at the kitchen table with 2 laptops and 3 cups of barley tea per morning, pulling ACRA filings, Singapore MAS records, and the specific regulatory instruments governing foreign PE ownership of licensed healthcare facilities in Singapore's 2019 Healthcare Framework Amendment. She built a case, quietly, the way her father had worked, without drama, without announcement, on the logic that the work would speak for itself when it was finished. Jae-won's legal team, initially skeptical, professionally polite in the way of people who have been told to be professional with someone they haven't assessed yet, became, by the third day, less polite and more engaged because the analysis was good. By the fourth day, they were building on it. "You should have been a lawyer," the lead attorney, a woman named Shin Yuri, told her on the fourth evening, in the tone of a compliment delivered by someone who does not give them easily. "I was going to be," Adesuwa said. "Then my father died, and I needed to work, and the timeline shifted." Shin Yuri looked at her for a moment. Timelines can shift back. Adesuwa did not answer, but she noted the comment. Jae-won was in the room every evening when the team met to review progress. He sat at the corner of the table, not at the head, which surprised her. The head was where Shin Yuri sat, because Shin Yuri was running the legal strategy and Jae-won understood this, and listened with the same precise quality of attention she had first noticed at the banquet. He rarely spoke. When he did, it was to ask one question that reshaped the room's thinking. On the sixth evening, 2 days before the shareholders' meeting, he brought Seo-jun again. The boy had apparently discovered that Adesuwa knew the names of all 32 current Premier League teams and their founding years, which was a piece of information she'd acquired for reasons she no longer fully remembered, and this had elevated her to a status in his assessment that was apparently quite high. He sat beside her at the table while she worked, drawing a notebook, and occasionally passed her drawings of what he described as the bad man's building being demolished by a robot. "Does the robot have a name?" she asked him. He thought about it. "Adesuwa bot," he said. She looked at the drawing. The robot was unmistakably female, with large eyes and what appeared to be a laptop for a chest. "I'm honored," she said. From across the table, where Jae-won was reading a document, she heard, very quietly, carefully contained, the sound of another genuine laugh. She did not look up, but she was smiling. The Singapore filing was submitted on day 7. The MAS compliance review was triggered automatically by the filing, exactly as the regulatory instrument required. Daepeng Holdings' controlling stake in the medical facility was flagged for review, which did not dissolve it, but created a 60-day uncertainty window that made it, as a threat instrument, significantly less reliable. Marcus Teo called the following morning. "He wants to meet," Jae-won told her, in the lobby on his way back from a run. His hair was disheveled again. He had the slightly different face he wore when things were moving in the right direction, not triumphant, just more present, like a lamp turned up one notch. "Good," she said. He asked who filed the compliance review. "What did you tell him?" "I told him it was identified by my legal team." A pause, the duration of which contained a different kind of weight, "which is accurate, in the sense that you are, I am realizing, more useful to me than anyone currently on my legal retainer." She looked at him. "I am a catering staff member." "You were," he said. "I would like to discuss a different arrangement." She was quiet for a moment. The lobby was empty except for the two of them and 3 centimeters of morning air. "After the shareholders' meeting," she said. "Let's get through that first." He nodded. After the meeting, he agreed. He held the lobby door for her. As she passed, his hand brushed her shoulder. Not intentional, just the geometry of 2 people in the same doorway, and it stayed 1 beat longer than necessary. Neither of them commented on it. She filed the detail away. The call came at 11:47 p.m. the night before the shareholders' meeting. Adesuwa was awake. She had been awake since 9, working to the last of the documentation review, running on barley tea and the focused energy of someone who can see the finish line. Her phone rang, and the number was her mother's, and she answered without alarm because her mother sometimes called late when her hospital shift ended early. But it was not her mother's voice. It was a man's voice, Korean accented English, flat and professional, the voice of someone delivering a message they had been paid to deliver without inflection. He said, "Your mother is with us. She will remain comfortable as long as you do not attend the Hanwha shareholders meeting tomorrow. You will not contact Ryu Jae-won. You will return to your apartment and stay there. You have until 6 a.m. to confirm compliance. Then the call ended. She sat completely still for 6 seconds. Then she called Jae-won. He answered on the first ring, which meant he had not been asleep either. She told him in 20 seconds, flat, without panic. He was quiet for 2 seconds after she finished. Then, I'm coming. Don't. I'm coming, he said again. Not urgently, not dramatically. The voice of someone who has made a decision and is communicating it as a fact. He arrived in 11 minutes. With Nam and 2 others she didn't know, and a quality of focused stillness that was different from his usual composure, sharper, purposeful, the specific version of control that was not about appearing calm, but about being useful. Your mother's phone location, Nam said, already on his tablet. Last ping was 40 minutes ago, Mapo-gu. She works in Sinchon, Adesuwa said. She takes the same bus home at. The bus route passes through Mapo-gu, Nam said. We have a team moving. How long? 12 minutes. Jae-won sat down across from her. He put his hands flat on the table, the way he did when he was organizing his thoughts. This is Shim, he said. Not a question. Who else? He's panicking. The Singapore filing, the compliance review, Marcus Teo. He's losing the clean majority he thought he had. This is, he paused, a desperate move. A desperate move that has my mother, she said. He looked at her directly. We will get her back. You can't promise that. No, he said. I can't promise it. But I can tell you that I have 5 people moving on her location right now. That Nam has never not found someone, and that Shim Bayasu, whatever else he is not a man who benefits from harm to a nurse who has nothing to do with his corporate war. A pause. This is leverage. He wants compliance, not consequences. That means your mother is currently sitting somewhere uncomfortable but safe, and his goal is the meeting, not her. She looked at him. How sure are you? 70%, he said, which was the most honest answer she had ever received from anyone in a crisis. She exhaled. Okay, she said. Okay. He stayed at the table. He did not offer empty reassurance. He did not perform helpfulness. He sat with her in the specific way of a person who understands that presence is sometimes the only thing to offer, and that offering it without packaging is harder than it looks. At 12:31 a.m., Nam's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, said 3 words she couldn't hear from across the room. Then he looked up. She's at a private car park in Mapo-gu. 3 men, 1 vehicle. Our team has eyes on them. Is she? She appears fine. She is. Nam paused, with the expression of someone relaying information that surprised him. She is apparently arguing with one of the men about whether the temperature in the vehicle is adequate. Adesuwa closed her eyes for a moment. That's her, she said. Adesuwa Igbinoba was extracted at 1:08 a.m. without incident, which she characterized afterward as a lot of unnecessary dramatics for a Tuesday. She had, apparently, spent the 40 minutes in the vehicle explaining to her captors, 2 of whom spoke limited English, the nutritional inadequacies of the meal they had offered her, and the general incompetence of people who went to this much trouble to intimidate someone without doing it properly. One of the men, Nam reported with what appeared to be reluctant admiration, had offered her his jacket. She arrived at the apartment building at 1:30 a.m., and her first words to her daughter were, I told you something was happening. Is he here? Mama, the handsome widower, is he here? You were just abducted. For 40 minutes. I have had worse Tuesday nights. Adesuwa Igbinoba looked around the apartment lobby with the efficient assessment of a nurse evaluating a ward, then looked at the man standing slightly behind Adesuwa. Her expression did an extremely rapid series of calculations. Jae-won, she said in Korean. He stepped forward. Mrs. Igbinoba, I am deeply sorry. Stop apologizing, she said. Are you going to win tomorrow? A pause. Yes. Good. She looked at her daughter. Walk me to the room. We need to talk about your father. Adesuwa Igbinoba had known about 1993. Not from her husband. He had never told her directly, but from the way he sometimes talked about Seoul, about Korea, about the connections between things that seemed distant and were not. From the way he'd insisted on teaching Adesuwa Korean from a language tape in 2001, when they had no particular reason for it. This is a language of future, he'd told 9-year-old Adesuwa. for when the circle comes back around. He knew, Adesuwa said. He knew the connection would. He didn't know, her mother said. He hoped. Your father was not a man who believed in coincidence. He called it long arithmetic, that things added up slowly, and that if you were patient the sum arrived. She paused. He told me once, one time only, that he had done something in 1993 that mattered, that someone owed a debt they didn't know how to pay, that someday the debt would find its way home, because debts always did. Adesuwa sat very still. He left you that Korean tape on purpose, her mother said quietly. I think he was preparing in the only way he could, in case the circle came back around. The circle came back around, Adesuwa said. Yes, my love, her mother said. It did. She did not sleep. She did not try to. At 4 a.m., she found Jae-won in the building's small courtyard. He had been making calls, managing the overnight preparations for the shareholders' meeting, and had apparently stepped outside between them for the same reason she had. Because the silence of Seoul at 4 a.m. was a specific kind of silence that helped. They stood for a moment without speaking. The Han River was somewhere to the south, invisible but present. A food stall 2 streets over was already lit. An early morning poaching, the orange glow of it soft against the pre-dawn dark. She's all right, he said. She's asleep. She was annoyed her phone was taken. A pause. She keeps asking if you're handsome. He looked at her sideways. What do you tell her? Adesuwa looked at the food stall's glow. I tell her is irrelevant. A beat. Is it? She was quiet for a moment. She thought about the first aid kit at 3 a.m., the jollof rice, the 3 centimeters of lobby air, the hand at the door, the laugh she had not expected, the journal with her father's name underlined. I don't know yet, she said. I think I need the next 30 years to decide. He was quiet, then not quite smiling, but with the expression of a man who is choosing not to let himself smile yet, he said, I have 30 years. She looked at him, the full weight of it, on both sides now. The meeting, she said. The meeting, he agreed. They stood in the courtyard for another minute, not touching, not speaking. A cat crossed the alley between the building and the food stall. The sky was starting to consider becoming slightly less dark. Are you still here? Drop a comment. What is your father's name? This one is for every child who inherited their parents' unfinished work. Keep watching. We are almost there. The Hongwoo Group Extraordinary Shareholders Meeting convened at 9 a.m. in the 44th floor boardroom. Adesuwa was not in the room. She was in an adjacent conference room with Shin Yuri and 2 members of the legal team on a shared communication line, watching the proceedings on a screen. Shim Byung-soo arrived with 6 advisors and the expression of a man who had calculated the board numbers and was confident. He had, Adesuwa noted, the particular quality of stillness of someone who has made a decision they believe is irreversible. The kind of stillness that comes before a person extends a hand for the handshake that ends a war. What he did not know, what Kim Do-young, seated beside him, did not know, was that Marcus Teo had flown in from Singapore overnight. He was in the room, seat 17. He had signed the cooperative agreement at 7:45 a.m. He also did not know that the 3 board members Shin believed he had neutralized with a shareholder call, the one made with information from the listening device network, or what remained of it, had been contacted in the previous 48 hours by a compliance attorney in Singapore with documentation suggesting that their cooperation with Daepung's interests could constitute a breach of fiduciary duty, given the irregular funding structure of the acquisition campaign. The first proxy vote revealed the miscalculation. The second confirmed it. By the third, Shim Byung-soo had the expression of a man recalculating very rapidly, and by the fourth, he had the expression of a man who understood that he had lost. The motion to install a new board majority failed. 23 votes to 14. Jae-won did not celebrate. She could see him on the screen, still, composed, taking the result with the exact equanimity with which he imagined he had taken in everything else. He shook hands with the board members who had held. He thanked Marcus Teo with a brief inclination of his head that contained, she thought, something more than professional gratitude. Then he looked, briefly, at the camera in the corner of the room. She did not know if he could see the adjacent conference room. Probably he could not. She looked back at him anyway. Shim Byung-soo left the building at 9:47 a.m. without speaking to anyone. Kim Do-young followed him. The boardroom reconvened for ordinary business. At 10:15 a.m., Adesuwa's phone rang. "My son," Jae-won said, without preamble, "would like to know if you can come to dinner tonight. He has drawn 17 new pictures for you and would like to show them in sequence." She thought about the drawing of the robot, the large eyes and laptop chest. 17, she said. He started at midnight. He was apparently unable to sleep. Understandable. It was a dramatic night. "Yes." A pause. "Adesuwa." "Yes." The arrangement I mentioned. The different arrangement. She could hear in his voice the precise quality of a man choosing his words as carefully as he chose everything. "I would like to discuss it at dinner, if you're willing." She thought about the journal, the underlined name, the tape, the long arithmetic of things that travel 30 years before they add up. She thought about her father, who had stepped between three men of fourth on a Tuesday in Lagos and not thought twice, and about a man in Seoul who had written it down and never stopped looking for the way to say thank you. She thought about 3 centimeters of morning air. "Tell him," she said, "to put the drawings in order. I want to see the whole story." A pause. Then, quietly, with the voice of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just felt the weight shift. "He will." Dinner was in a Hannock courtyard in Buckshon. Not the tower, not a penthouse, but a low, quiet house with a tiled roof and a persimmon tree in the garden, and the smell of cedar and barley tea coming from somewhere inside. Seo-jun had arranged the drawings in a line along the floor of the main room. There were 22 of them. He had added 5 more during the afternoon. The story they told, in the way only a 7-year-old can tell a story, involved a robot named Adesuwa Bot, a company called Hangul that was shaped like a cloud, a bad man whose face was a rectangle, and a father who ran in the morning and thought the robot had very good eyes. "This one," Seo-jun said, pointing to the last drawing, "is the ending." The last drawing showed 3 figures in a courtyard, small, slightly disproportionate, with the earnest inaccuracy of a child's line. A man, a woman, a boy between them. Above them, the persimmon tree. Below them, the word Adesuwa had said the second day they'd met, which Seo-jun had apparently retained precisely. The beginning. She looked at the drawing for a moment. Then she looked at Jae-won, who was standing to the side, watching her with the full weight of his attention, not trying to make it smaller. "He gets the narrative structure from you," she said. "He gets it from his mother." Jae-won said she was a storyteller. "She raised him right," Adesuwa said. "Yes," he said. "She did." Seo-jun looked between them with the focused patience of a child who understands something important is happening and has decided his job is to wait. Adesuwa knelt down to his level. "It's a very good ending," she said. "It's a beginning," he corrected, in the tone of someone correcting a factual error. "It's a beginning," she agreed. They sat in the courtyard after dinner. After Seo-jun had been taken to bed by a housekeeper who had clearly been with the household for years and had. Adesuwa noted, looked at her with particular assessment of someone who would decide about her over the course of many more dinners. Not this one. The persimmon tree was lit from below by a small garden lamp. The city murmured beyond the walls. Somewhere a late train passed. "My father saved your father's life," Adesuwa said, looking at the tree. "Yes. And 30 years later, I stopped someone from listening to your conversations." "Also yes. And then I found a regulatory filing that undermined a hostile takeover. And then that," he agreed. "This is a very unusual situation. I have been telling myself that," he said, "for approximately 12 days, and it is becoming less persuasive." She looked at him. He was looking at the tree. He had the expression of a man who has decided to stop running away from his thoughts. Or rather, who has found that for the first time in 3 years, they have run somewhere he doesn't need to outpace. "The arrangement," she said. "What exactly are you proposing?" He turned to her. In the lamplit quiet of the courtyard, the usual architecture of his composure was still there, but with a different quality, like a window left slightly open. Something coming in, something going out. "Hangul needs a head of international compliance," he said. Someone who understands maritime law, shipping contracts, and the specific geometry of moments when a room is about to go wrong. A pause. Another pause longer. Need someone at dinner on Tuesdays and Saturdays who can teach a 7-year-old the founding years of Premier League clubs and draw robots with good eyes. She looked at him for a long moment. Those are two separate propositions, she said. Yes, he said. I am presenting them separately. Deliberately. The first does not require the second. The second does not require the first. He paused. I want you to choose each of them independently. She thought about independence, about the life she had built carefully from the ruin of earlier things, about timelines that shifted and might shift back, about a language tape, about long arithmetic. The compliance role, she said. I would need to complete my law qualification. That's 2 years part-time. Hanwoo has an education sponsorship program, and Tuesday dinners. Saturdays, too, he said very carefully. If he wanted. She looked at the persimmon tree, then at him. You don't make declarations, she said. I have been told, he said, that I express things, indirectly, through first aid kits and jollof rice. A beat. I would like to try being more direct. Being direct would be, I don't want you to leave, he said. Simply, without elaboration, in the voice of a man who has stripped the sentence down to the weight it actually carries. I have spent 3 years getting used to the particular shape of an absence. I don't want to get used to yours. A silence that had weight to it. The persimmon tree, the lamp, the city beyond the wall. That, she said finally, was direct. Yes, your son drew us into his ending. He drew you in first. Jae-won said. I was added later. She laughed. The same surprise sound as the first time. Unplanned, genuine. He watched it cross her face with the expression of a man for whom this has become the most important sight in the room. She did not close the 3 centimeters between them. Not tonight. But she turned toward him, fully, clearly, without the practiced management of distance she had been maintaining for 12 days, and said, Ask me again in 30 years whether it was worth it. I will, he said. I intend to. They sat in the courtyard until the city quieted. A small light burned in the window where Seo Jun was sleeping. 22 drawings lined up on the floor, and at the end of them, in a 7-year-old's careful hand, the word the beginning, which was not an ending and was not pretending to be, because some stories are only complete when they agree to keep going. 3 weeks later, a formal letter arrived at the law department of Yonsei University, sponsoring an international student's part-time enrollment in the LLB program. The letter was signed by Ryu Jae-won, chairman, Hanwoo Group. In the section where it asked for the name of the incoming student, it read, Igbinoba Adesuwa, Nigerian Korean, observer, inherited her father's long arithmetic and her mother's patience, and used both to walk into a room where she was invisible and see exactly what everyone else had missed. 6 months later, in the ACRA files of the Singapore Corporate Registry, in the dry, neutral language of regulatory compliance, there appeared notation that the Daepeng Holdings stake in a licensed healthcare facility had been restructured to 47.8% following a compliance review. Marcus Teo's daughter's care was uninterrupted. 1 year later, in a Hanok courtyard in Bukchon, on a Saturday evening that smelled of cedarwood and barley tea and persimmons beginning to fall, Ryu Seo-jun showed his art teacher 29 new drawings, which constituted, he explained, the second chapter